So I want to thank you guys for all being here this morning, virtually and in person. My name is Larry Simmons, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement for the Nobody Asked Me campaign. This has been an amazing past 2 years, working with an amazing team of researchers, creating a great marriage of academia and community to really do some great work for our young people and for our city. And so I'll kind of introduce the blocks of conversation that will happen today. And so next we'll have some words from Dean Chris Morphew, then some words from Dr. Richard Lofton, and then a few words, well, special presentation from Mayor Brandon Scott, and then words from Dr. Sonia Santiago.
Good morning, everyone. All right, that's nearly a rousing good morning back. That's a good start. I appreciate that. I'm Chris Morphew. I'm Dean of the School of Education at Johns Hopkins, and Richard asked me to give some opening remarks. I'm going to keep these remarks really brief, and then I'll hand it over to Dr. Lofton. So, and I know we've got people watching online, so good morning to the folks watching online as well. Dr. Santiago, Senator Bill Ferguson, Mayor Brandon Scott, citizens, policymakers, educators, researchers. Welcome to the Fulfilling Maryland's Promise of a Thorough and Efficient Education Symposium. On behalf of Johns Hopkins and the School of Education, I want to thank you so much for attending. This is going to be a great day, and we're very glad you're here and participating in this important event. This is a unique opportunity to share important insights into the challenges and opportunities of public education here in our city and our state. Insights gained from people at the heart of the experience, and I think you'll hear that over and over again, from the people at the heart of the experience, students and their families. This symposium is an outgrowth of community-based research launched by Dr. Richard Lofton and his colleague, community organizer Larry C. Simmons, and their team through the Nobody Asked Me campaign, which aims to empower Baltimore students, families, and community members and highlight their experiences. The Nobody Asked Me campaign is different, and it caught my attention because of its difference. It isn't like other programs. It doesn't offer a new intervention to increase math scores. It doesn't analyze the effectiveness of a new curriculum. It doesn't use students as test subjects. Instead, it asks them what they think. And when Richard talked to me early on about this project, and the gleam in his eye was all about this, asking people in the community what they think, what they need, what's important to them, and what's important to their families in securing an education. I know that sounds very, very sensible, sounds very, very rational, but I can tell you that's a pretty radical idea, asking people about their feelings and about what they need in their communities. One of our school's most renowned experts, Dr. Joyce Epstein, has been working on building school and family partnerships across the nation for more than 25 years, so we do have some experience in this. And one of the things we've learned from Joyce's work is that when students and families are engaged as partners in the educational process, learning is more thorough and efficient. And we as education researchers, policymakers, and practitioners can gain vital information about how to make that educational experience better for everyone. This project draws on the talents and expertise of Dr. Lofton and a number of individuals from the School of Education. But it's also a university-wide project. It draws on expertise from the Bloomberg School of Public Health, the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success, Baltimore City School Services, city schools, and community organizations, all of which are represented here today. It is truly a broad-based community effort. This work has received grants from the Baltimore Community Foundation and the Spencer Foundation, as well as support from the Johns Hopkins Catalyst Award, the Office of Economic Development, and the Urban Health Institute. It has also received over $13,000 of additional support from individual donors and community members who pitched in $25 here, $50 there, $100 there during the Nobody Asked Me crowdfunding campaign. And I believe that was the most successful crowdfunding campaign of in our experience at the School of Education. We're just getting into that, but it was one of the things we launched, and we're really proud of how many people contributed to that effort. So I'm excited, as you are, to hear more about this work, and I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Richard Lofton, who is, in addition to being a friend of mine, assistant professor in the Johns Hopkins School of Education and principal investigator of the Nobody Asked Me campaign. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's so good to see everyone. It's so good to see school district leaders. It's so good to see academics and quote-unquote experts. It's so good to see community partners. And it's just so good to be with everyone to talk about this important issue, and that is fulfilling the promise. 60 years ago, or around 60 years ago, Martin Luther King marched on the Lincoln Memorial, and he said, "We have come to get a check, to talk about a check of insufficient funds." And I think today we are here to really address that same issue that King talked about 60 years ago, a check that has been denied to so many of our students, and we need to make sure our students get that insufficient check that our students need. And what I mean by that is what you will see later on when we talk about the educational pathways with our youth, when we talk about the unemployment that's happening with our youth, when we talk about the transportation that our students are dealing with, trying to get home and trying to get to school. Also, when you think about the violence our students are encountering every single day. So today, I'm excited because we can come together and figure out a way to fulfill a promise that King talked about, and a promise that today we're still trying to figure out, how do we make sure our students have an education that's thorough and efficient. So welcome and thank you.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? Good. I'm Sonia Santiago, CEO of Baltimore City Public Schools, and it is quite an honor to be with you all this morning. I will say I felt both the impact of 18 months to 2 years worth of virtual, as well as the fact that I have aged by 2 or 3 years. Since I've last been here, I had to ask some very helpful Hopkins undergrads along my way, probably 5, how to get here. And I've been in this building at least no less than 15 times in my career. So that just goes to show how we're all kind of working to get back, but it is always good to be here. I also want to say a particular thank you both to Dr. Lofton, Larry Simmons, and Dr. Shusky. Did I say your name right? Is he here? Yes, okay. Just because, and I want to say a couple of things. First, and a particular thank you to them. For somebody who has spent a good amount of time in what we affectionately and sometimes disparagingly refer to as the academy, I have had a number of different relationships, not all of them have with folks in higher ed. And this trio of folks were truly partners. They have always been open to the push and pushing back in really thoughtful ways. that have been productive and I think really helped generate the power that I hope will be the application of the study and the results that you all will have the benefit of hearing later this morning. I want to also thank Dr. Josh Sharstein just for his continued application of incredible analysis, mental acumen, and bringing the full force of his graduate students, which anybody who has ever been a professor knows your graduate students make up a lot of the work you're actually able to do. And he has brought it to bear in real tangible ways. I think similarly that reference a lot of the themes you're going to hear this morning that get down to really some of the moves to address some of the repercussions of systemic inequities. And Josh and his team partnered with a lot of quantitative analysis that frankly has helped us in real tangible ways in the discussion of school funding, underfunding, and the impact of schools. A lot of times you can't make your case just by having only a compelling story. You've got to have the stories plus the data together give you a winning team, and this team really has walked the talk of institutional support for our city schools. The Nobody Asked Me campaign is one of those efforts I think that a school system like ours could very easily choose to kind of shunt to the side or say, well, that's nice, but and have a list of 15 buts to disprove or to counter what this analysis, what this collection of the real lived experiences of our students and our families are. But that is not the posture we are taking as city schools. We are taking the results of this very seriously. It actually affirms and frankly gives a depth to some of what young people have been telling us in a variety of ways and have informed some of our, we call it recovery work, I call it next generation work. Recovery sounds like you've got an addict that needs to be repaired. I think the work we have to do moving forward is really about how are we reconnecting with young people in deeper ways and building the communities of schools that they need, that their families need. And the real brilliance, I think, of the Nobody Asked Me campaign is that in its title, it is doing what we often hear. It's actually asking people about their lived experiences as alum, as current students, as folks who are the ones who have been here long before I arrived in Baltimore City and whose children, grandchildren will be here long after I leave this post. And that really has to be the attitude and the posture with which we engage this research. The power of this study is really that it captures some elements of the struggle that our young people still encounter to receive a quality education from multiple vantage points. And I'll give you kind of one example, two examples from me that have already had immediate impact. So the first that you will hear is the real present felt needs of our young people around how we give them signals through our buildings, through what they get to eat during the day, and through how long or how arduous their journey to school is, right? So these are all things that you would think are kind of minor appendages to the hardcore of, are you learning history, where are you with chemistry, and can you read by the end of second grade? They're actually those factors that would be easy to dismiss if we just thought of them as kind of side dishes. And what the voices of the young people in this campaign, this study say, is that they're actually essential to how they interpret, how the adults that are charged to serve them feel about them. These are young people who know the differences between their buildings in this zip code and the buildings they go to visit at an away game. These are young people who interpret the food that is served to them as a indication of how adults, whether it's me or anybody else that seems removed from their daily experience, feel about their worth. And so one kind of tangible thing that we have done is we've really accelerated some of the work that we had to do this year around school lunches because of supply chain issues and labor shortages and all of the reasons that I would give young people as, look, this is why this is challenging. And let me be clear, I had my own middle school mini survey that came home weekly to let me know how the lunches were. And one of my daughters said to me, I can't do a turkey sandwich for the 4th day in a row. I am bringing a lunch tomorrow. And what we saw was that echoed in how young people internalize their value and worth. And so instead of just kind of continuing to say, this is supply chain, these are workforce issues, we actually have caucused immediately within city schools. We didn't wait for the official release of the report. And we have a series of 4 immediate action steps, some of which cost money, that we're taking because we are committed that young people will not have to look at the food they eat every day and wonder whether people really care about them as people. Right? We have, and I want to also say that one of the things that's also interesting is young people know, based on the work and the opportunities that we offer them and that we ask them to do, whether we think they are capable, right, of developing their full talents. So while some people might be surprised, even in our own city school surveys, we heard from young people, we want more access to higher level math. We want more access to world languages. They are not separate in the eyes of students. All of these collectively say what we think about them. And I think the power of this study is that it links it to some of the historical, systemic issues that we have to come to terms with as a city and a community. It doesn't mean we fixate it, and Dr. Lofton and I have gone back and forth, and I think we make each other better with this. I don't think it means that we now adopt, and I've been fairly straightforward about this, I don't think it means we now label a generation of children as broken and so traumatized that we can't ask them to do anything. That's not the purpose of this work. The purpose of the work is to be able to name what the remnants of systemic neglect, frankly, have led to. It is to assure young people that, frankly, you're not crazy, what you're experiencing is valid, and then to say, but we're not going to stay here. And we have opportunities that we're creating for healing. And we have opportunities that will link you to your purpose. And I will close with this, that anytime I'm feeling kind of down or depressed, I do one of 2 things. I either go to a kindergarten class, a good one, by the way. I don't like low-performing kindergarten classes. I either go to a good kindergarten class, or I take a trip down to the National African American History and Culture Museum. And since we were in spring break, I couldn't find the kindergarten class, so I took my 3 girls down to DC. And I have to tell you, what was invigorating to me was to walk through the Reconstruction Exhibit, which if any of you want to see it, I think it's there through August. And I walked through the Reconstruction Exhibit, and for those of you who are thinking about history and its period, Reconstruction, after about the first 7 to 8 years, became one of the most violent periods within African American history and US history against violence directly targeting those of African descent. But what was inspiring, and I'm sure you're sitting there like, what in God's name would be inspiring, Sonia, about looking at that period of history? What was inspiring was the link and the continual thread of a community of people who committed to the education of their young people as one of the primary objectives of their newly found freedom. It was their struggle and push to, regardless of the fact that schools were being burned down almost as soon as they were built, regardless of the fact that there was a hegemonic attack launched on them, that is not what the stories were replete with. They were just as robustly filled with people and communities who, despite the odds, said our children are worthy of developing their full talents, and that our children and the survival of our community are intricately tied. And so I left that Reconstruction exhibit saying this work can be done. But we cannot do it if we have separate institutions individually trying to figure out the work. Because the lesson of those communities through Reconstruction is they worked together. And so this Nobody Asked Me campaign for me represents the push and the pull and the commitment to excellence and to not allowing a broken child or a broken community narrative to be what will be left in the history books. What I want left in the history books are the voices that you will hear of our young people, telling our stories, telling their stories, and then their stories of how adults mobilized to act upon the needs that they surfaced. That needs to be our story. I don't need it to be in a museum, but that needs to be our story as we embark on this work. So I want to thank Johns Hopkins. I want to thank the team again of True Partnership. And I look forward to hearing all of your reactions to the same work that we have been able to begin to mobilize around. Thank you. And I don't know if Mayor Scott is here. Well, you can let Mayor Scott know I went a little longer, and so I took some of his time if he's here. Okay.
Peace, everyone. It's Mayor Brandon Scott. Our young people are Baltimore's greatest asset. It is our obligation as leaders, educators, and policy experts to ensure that they are afforded the education they deserve so they can grow up and become the best versions of themselves. You are gathered here to fulfill that obligation by fulfilling Maryland's promise of a thorough and efficient education. We have students, parents, city school leaders, community members, and Hopkins researchers working together to build a platform for a brighter future for our city. I am proud to have you all as partners as we work to prioritize youth throughout all of our communities. Thank you.
So next we'll have Chief Hike Hubbard from Baltimore City Public Schools. Little switch. I'm sorry, I should have texted you.
You're really going to make me go after Dr. S., right? Who is one of the best speakers at City Schools. That's fine. No, good morning, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here. As a member of the advisory committee for Nobody Asked Me, I am pleased to share City Schools' partnership in this work and the excitement that myself and other team members who serve on the committees and for supporting the research are so excited about this work. I will just say that we have not done historically a great job of listening to our kids, right? Our kids' voice matters so much. We listen to elected officials and the stakeholders and the families, and that's all important. It's really critical. But not listening to the voices of our young people and understanding what they want their education to be. As Dr. S said, changing the narrative so that when we hear what they're saying now, we implement strategies that will improve their own personal experience. Anywhere from the food in the cafeteria, which I hear about a lot, to how I get to school, what my experience has been like. And we really need to use that voice and this research to make that change possible. This isn't just research. I know a lot of times practitioners will sit in a room and they create research and have numbers on a paper. This is live, real live experience, right? This is taking research to policy, then to practice. And we're so excited about this partnership. I first met Dr. Lofton a couple of years ago when you hosted a symposium here, and I was fortunate to sit on a panel to talk about systemic inequities that our kids have been experiencing. And from that has grown a beautiful partnership, a relationship, and our PCAB chair, who also serves as part of the work here, Larry Simmons, really working together. These folks and their whole team came out. We had family festivals over the past summer, and we literally hosted about 17,000 people in person. They were there, handing out flyers, talking to kids, getting folks to sign up for the research study, getting interviews figured out. And it was just clear to me, this is not just some folks in a room thinking, let's go do some research on some kids in Baltimore City. It is, let's get in, dig in deep, and really be truly invested in what our children are saying about their experience with school. So I just want to highlight that as part of the executive summary. I know you're all going to go in a minute and talk about that more deeply, but I just want to share a couple other thoughts. Throughout history, Baltimore has been a city where Black people have built communities and have attempted to thrive. Despite their best efforts, Black Baltimoreans have faced physical and structural violence, academic and economic and personal, has created barriers for youth attempting to reach their academic, economic, and personal aspirations. The Nobody Asked Me research team calls the structural violence strange fruit in their report. They show how racial segregation, white flight, and underfunding of schools have historically denied too far many students from receiving the instructional resources needed throughout effective and efficient education system. The report asks all of us to reimagine our youth and think about new possibilities of equity, and ensuring that we work together to fulfill our educational promise. The Nobody Asked Me campaign seeks to disrupt this historical contemporary manifestations of oppression by highlighting youth perspective of their day-to-day lives and how they would change systems to reach their dreams for a better life and community outcomes. Dr. Lofton and the team conducted over 135 interviews with youth and their family members. They also partnered with city schools and other city agencies in the hopes of eliminating the challenges that youth endure from the data they collected. This report is so powerful because it asks students and parents what they want out of their educational system. The research team developed 4 themes from asking these questions: inequities in transportation, poor school conditions, violence, and pathways of promise. Not only did we hear from students, but the research team facilitated strategy groups that consisted of mayoral cabinet members, city leaders, school district leaders, researchers, students, and parents. These meetings co-created solid recommendations that will support students and their families. Young people and their families continually provided solutions that looked at systemic changes and improvements that can be made to their day-to-day lives. These important and needed policy recommendations highlight the transportation, effective adult and career success paths, decreasing violence, and having healthy and safe school buildings for our students. This report is what's needed so students can receive their educational promise in Baltimore City. And again, I just want to thank the team for all the work they've done. I am pleased to have walked alongside of you the whole way, continue to walk alongside of you. Our Reconnect, Reimagine plan calls for 2 key things as cornerstones in the work we do. It calls for listening to families and incorporating them into the governance and advocacy of the work we're doing, but it also calls for elevating student voice. This work has helped us meet that goal in a number of ways. The city schools is doing it and partnering with you so we can actually do this work and really use student voice in how we implement policy, change policy, and practice day to day. So thank you for allowing me to be part of the work. I look forward to continuing along with you all on this journey, and let's elevate our kids' voice in the right way and keep moving forward. Thank you so much.
So I know we've kind of switched a little bit up within our agenda, folks who are following along, but we're catching up. So I'd like to introduce my colleagues to kind of share our executive summary this morning. The Nobody Asked Me research team, you guys want to come on up?
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to read a poem called Strange Fruit, inspired by the Billie Holiday song. Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolias and sweet and fresh, the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here's a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the tree to drop. Here's the strange and bitter crop.
In 1910, the mayor of Baltimore said, "Blacks should be quarantined in isolated slums in order to reduce the incidence of civil disturbance, to prevent the spread of communicable disease into the nearby white neighborhoods, and to protect property values among the white community." We believe today those are rooted strange fruit. We say that because we still living out that today. When you think about the racial segregation, when you think about the belief that Black people in some way or another way are super predators or are criminals and there's something wrong with them, Or if we think about how many people look at protecting white property values versus protecting all property values, we still have some strange fruit. But if we even go further in our world today, and after listening to many students, after being involved with many strategy groups, and hearing people from all walks within Baltimore, we came up with 7 other strange fruit that we see every single day that prevent us from seeing our students, but more importantly, prevent us from loving our students. I want us today to go a step further. I want us to see, I want us to provide environments where we can make sure that our students feel like they're being loved. So there's several things I think that we have to work through today. One of them is the underfunding of schools. Make sure our leaders have funding so they can do the job that they're supposed to do. It's not the time to attack them. It's not the time to try to make them the enemy, but it's a time to support them and work with them and provide them with the resources that they need, also the data that they need in order to make informed decisions. But not only that, when you think about the gratuitous violence, this violence that we think about often is this interaction, but we're not thinking about the structural violence, how things are structured in ways so people are in concentrated areas where there's not a global economy within that system. And many people every single day are looking at and trying to find out how they're going to survive. But not only that, we still have the racial segregation in many of our cities, and many people today are even afraid to even work with Black people, right? We still are encountering strange fruit. So this right here, it just shows, we interviewed 135 youth and their family members, and this is just a map to show some of the areas that we interviewed our youth and young people. And you see some are more dense than others. Let's go to findings.
Good morning, my name is Joseph Baselvic, and we're going to start off by talking about one of the 4 pillars of the research, which was around safety and violence. And kind of, you can read more in depth in the report, and we'll go into it this afternoon. But kind of one of the key top-level takeaways we had when talking to youth about violence and safety and seeing what they had to say in schools, neighborhoods, and across Baltimore, and interactions with police was this idea of taking a go-it-alone approach to trying to manage not the reality of violence at all times in all places, but the possibility of violence in their day-to-day lives. Next slide. So one quote that succinctly captures some of the patterns that we saw comes from Tanya, a 17-year-old high school student. She talked about how a shooting took place on her block at a time when she and her mother are usually on the porch or out and about, but happened to be somewhere else that day by chance. Tanya told us about how she makes sense of and responds to this reality. She says, as you can see here, the city is dangerous, but do I have to worry about it being directly dangerous to me? No. But being out and about? Yes, because anything can happen at any time. The crime rate, police brutality, a lot of racial stuff still going on. You just gotta be cautious in the city because it's dangerous, because you don't know nobody mindset. But here, it's every man for himself. So Tanya's words speak to a few of the ways that youth made sense of and responded to violence in their everyday lives and the conversations that we had to them. First, it's notable that Tanya describes violence, as I said, not as an inevitability, but as a constant possibility. As she says, she does not have to have concerns that anyone might target her directly, but that navigating daily life as a teenager entails the risk of being exposed to violence and victimization. This echoes what others, not only what other youth described in terms of navigating their neighborhoods, but also their schools. Students frequently described how fights and bullying were regular occurrences. These things interrupted the school day, and as we detail in greater depth in the report, had a negative impact on youth's abilities to form kind of strong and sustained relationships with peers and with adults, and on their ability to kind of have a positive educational experience on the whole. Youth regularly described how when fights happened or when they saw people getting involved in bad behavior in school, they often felt like their only response was to try to isolate themselves from undesirable situations and peers to the best of their abilities, because sometimes they even saw that adults didn't really have the capacity or power to kind of stop bullying or stop the violence that they saw. And in neighborhoods and in schools, this need to go it alone often came from the sense that students felt like they didn't have many people they could trust or sources of support to help them navigate these difficult realities of growing up in Baltimore. Second, it's kind of notable that in a list of things that can, quote, happen at any time, Tanya includes crime, police brutality, and racial inequality in unison. This sentiment was reflected by many other youths who spoke about the police as often increasing rather than addressing their safety concerns. Just as youth detailed anxiety over the possibility of walking down the wrong street or encountering the wrong people and experiencing violence in their neighborhoods, they regularly detailed racialized anxiety over the possibility of coming into any sort of contact with police. In many instances, this was in response to vicarious exposure to police contact in which family members, friends, or neighbors had a negative encounter with the police or were incarcerated. And as you kind of see, as you would go through the day and talk about this a little bit more during the strategy group session, and as you read the report, the experiences that youth and their families shared with us related to violence are likely very different from what youth in the suburbs of Baltimore or in more prosperous and predominantly white school districts around Maryland would share if asked about the same topics. A through line of how youth talked about safety and violence in interviews was the sense of having to go it alone, staying away from fights and avoiding certain neighborhoods or people or police. Youth themselves saw addressing safety concerns as necessary for improving their lives, their schools, and their city, and we'll discuss some possible interventions for how to address some of these things in the session on safety and violence this afternoon. What is clear from the interviews, though, is that the work to be done must center youth and find ways so that students don't have to navigate life on a go-it-alone basis and can live and learn in schools and communities that foster a sense of safety, belonging, and possibility. Thanks.
Another crucial aspect of our interview process was asking the youth about their opinions on transportation. And here we have a quote from Robin, who is a 20-year-old former student. And she says, "A lot of times there's people not actively smoking, but you could tell that they were just smoking. And they will say or do inappropriate things. And there's not really someone to be a barrier in between that. Like sexual comments or grabbing you and stuff like that. Just weird sexual harassment, I would say it is."
And just to sort of complement our findings on transportation, usually these conversations started with, the simple question like, what's your commute like going to school? And we found that stories centered around a perception of unreliability of public transportation. So students are experiencing buses that are late or skipping stops on a regular basis, and they've developed strategies to help them sort of navigate that and get themselves to school on time. So usually this means waking up earlier, arriving to the stop sooner. And students were telling us that they're still sort of experiencing lateness at the hands of public transportation. Second sort of realm that we heard from students was violence while on transportation. And this might be either being part of the experience of violence, either students to students, students to other passengers, or sort of witnessing violence while being on the buses. So experiences just waiting for the buses, moving into the buses, having these experiences of violences. And this is all before, going into the business of doing school. Sort of a third thing that builds off of these experiences of violences is the gendered experiences of students on these buses. So we found that our participants identifying as female had this sort of added burden of experiences of assault while either waiting for buses or while on buses, adding an additional sort of burden of feeling unsafe or unwelcome while on public transportation.
Oh, and here we have, here we focus on school infrastructure. And this is a quote from Zane, who is a 21-year-old former student. He says, "It's really disheartening. My half-sister went to high school in Montgomery County. They had really nice stuff, and I always wanted her to know how bad we had it. When I went there, I almost felt resentful of them for having all of these nice things. They had all these, new computer rooms. Even their school lunch was so much better. I just felt like it didn't make sense that one district in Maryland should have a significantly better schooling experience than we were. I think both We either got sent home or they came and fixed in our building.
So one of the things that we learned with the data on school infrastructure is our students are fully aware of the poor conditions that they are in. But not only that, they can drive 15 minutes away in a different school district and see nice school buildings, right? What I've learned through analyzing the data, it is not only the tangible, it is the intangible that causes the most harm and damage to students. And we have to look at it that way, that they associate where they belong, who likes them, who will perceive and welcome them, what type of jobs they're going to get from the intangible as well as the tangible. And so I wrote about in this piece, not about a hidden infrastructure. Many of us in education, we know about the hidden curriculum. You know, in the 70s and the 80s, researchers were talking about these unlearned lessons, or these lessons that are learned not through people verbalizing it, but you see it, you pick up on it, and you understand it, and it makes you feel a certain way. What I discovered in this data is our students understand, they see the differences, and they're asking us to provide them with the same school buildings that we say they deserve, right? And if they go 15 minutes away, they just will see different school buildings that are for other children. It is our duty to make sure that our students fulfill their promise as well as other school districts.
So up here we have a quote on pathways to success, and I want to read this, and as we're reading it, I just want you to think, does a manual really feel that there are pathways to success for all students within Baltimore? Do all students in Baltimore have access to the resources that they need to achieve their life goals? And so Emmanuel says, one of the things that always sticks out to me the most about the differences in the parts of Baltimore is that if you go to the poorer parts of Baltimore, it's really like a cracked concrete jungle. You feel like you're in a city, and you feel like you're stuck in the city. It doesn't feel like there's any escape from the very short radius around where you are. And so in looking at these interviews and attempting to think about what youth's aspirations and goals are, and what supports they feel that they have within schools and within their communities to help them achieve those goals, what emerged from these interviews is that there's a mismatch. There's a mismatch with the resources that students have in schools that help support them. And many students focused in on how this didn't focus in as much on what they were doing in high school or college, but tied this back all the way to elementary school, to kindergarten. And from that very beginning, from that educational foundation, there are certain communities that they indicated felt were not getting access to the education that they needed to build as they went forward throughout their educational careers. And they talked about schools that were in communities with violence and drugs and crumbling infrastructure, and they talked about the effect that this had on the students who attended some of these schools. Students also talked about their mental health and the resources that they felt were provided to help them navigate some of the problems. And the students didn't feel that either they themselves or that other students within their schools had access to the resources that they needed. And they also talked about connections with teachers. And I want to be clear, there were some students who spoke very favorably about their connections with teachers, but there were also far too many students who didn't feel that their teachers were invested in their academic success and also within their long-term success after they left schools. And then students also tied this to their wider communities. They looked at the jobs that were available. And some students talked about high-paying jobs in certain areas of Baltimore. but they also talked about how they didn't necessarily see the members of their own communities as the ones who were filling those jobs. And when they looked at the opportunities that were available to them, they struggled to see jobs that would provide them with a living wage and that would help them to support a family in the future. And so, really, to sum up this theme, we talked to students who had very high aspirations. They talked about wanting to be doctors or engineers and having good careers. But when they looked at their schools and when they looked at their communities, they didn't see the supports that they needed to help them achieve those aspirations.
All right, so we want to thank everyone for helping to support our work. We want to thank school and city leaders. We want to for sure thank Baltimore City Public School System, many community organizations, but we just want to thank everyone. And I want to thank my amazing research team. So thank you.